In this video, we're just going to look at a brief introduction to fractions, just to sort of remind you of some of the things you may have forgotten. One of the most important terms that go with fractions is denominator. What a denominator is, when we write a fraction, it's the piece that's on the bottom, and it's the number of parts to make a whole. So, for example, if we look at this figure, and we cut it into pieces, we can see that in this particular diagram there are 1, 2, 3, 4 parts needed to make up a whole. So looking at that particular figure, we would say that the denominator of this is 4. Another key term is the numerator. And the numerator is the number of parts of the whole that we have. So if we were to shade this picture down here and color in one of those parts, what we've got here is we have shaded 1/4 of this figure. And if we take a look at it, the denominator, the number of parts to make the whole, that's the number in the bottom, and it takes 4 parts to make the whole. And the numerator, the number of parts of the whole that we have shaded here, that's the top number in our fraction, and we have 1 part shaded. So we've shaded 1/4 of this figure. 1 is the numerator, 4 is the denominator. A concept that's going to be very important for us is equivalent fractions. That's two different fractions that have the same value. An easy example of that might be really comfortable with you is the idea that 2/4 and 1/2 are equivalent fractions. These are needed often when we're going to add or subtract fractions, which is something we'll get to later. But for right now, I just want to look at an example of a problem involving equivalent fractions. That problem is for us to find a fraction that is equivalent to 2/7 that has a denominator of 35. So we need a fraction that has the same value as 2/7. But instead of having 7 as a denominator, it has 35 as a denominator. Here's how we'll do that. If I've got 2/7 and I want to change the denominator so that it's going to be 35, what I'll need to do to that denominator to make it go from 7 to 35 is I'm going to need to multiply that denominator by 5 to get my new denominator. The important step here is whatever I do to the denominator, if I want to create an equivalent fraction, I have to do the exact same thing to the numerator. So if I multiply the denominator by 5, I also need to multiply the numerator by 5 so that my new fraction that is equivalent to 2/7 but has a denominator of 35 is going to be 10/35. Let's look at one more. Okay, this time, let's find a fraction that is equivalent to 3/8 that has a denominator of 32. So I start out with my fraction that is 3/8. I want to create an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 32. What do I have to do to turn this 8 into a 32? I'm going to have to multiply that denominator by 4. If I multiply the denominator 4, in order to keep these fractions equivalent, I also need to multiply the numerator by 4. And then 3 times 4 will give me 12. And so a fraction that is equivalent to 3/8 that has a denominator of 32 would be 12/32. Finding a denominator that we're going to call a common denominator eventually so that we can add fractions will be really important to us down the road.